Every locality in the country has tales of witches and witchcraft. Legend has it a coven met in Dollar in the 18th century, but in reality it was in the late 16th century that at least 2 women from the village were accused of witchcraft and imprisoned in Stirling, where their interrogation took place on 7th September 1597, as mentioned in the Minute of Presbytery, dated the same day. They were Catherine Kello, or Kellott, and Janet Crawford. Most likely they were just folk healers or midwives and had nothing to do with sorcery, but this was the beginning of the great witch hunt, under the auspices of James VI, that swept through Scotland. What happened to these women is unknown, as there is no further mention of them in the available records, but it is possible they were burned as witches. Around 1788, the Quarrel Burn in the village was a famous rendezvous point for these Dollar witches. There is an old traditional poem telling of their coven and their meeting with the devil, which goes, "In Quarrel Burn the witches meet, sign through the air, they scour for feet. They flee, until they reach Lochie Falls, where Old Nick in person his tribunal holds." According to the legend, they used to meet in the evening, and once the necessary preliminaries were over, they mounted their broomsticks, rose high into the air, and flew to their destination at Lochie Falls. This place was situated at the foot of Gloom Hill in Dollar. An old oak tree with its twisted and moss-grown trunk marked the spot of the witches' meeting place, where they reputedly held their midnight revelries. Beneath its branches there was a round circle of brown earth where no grass or vegetation grew. Local people claimed that some black deed had been committed there, while others thought that fire was the cause of it. Tradition tells a different story, however. It's said the witches had heard that a local farmer had spoken rather disrespectfully of them, and he had blamed them for the death of some of his cattle. He believed they'd been cursed by the witches, as one by one they had taken ill. Angry at what they'd heard, the witches swore vengeance on him. An opportunity soon arose, and they took him to Lochie Falls, where he stood trial before the tribunal. Overseeing the events was His Black Majesty, the Devil himself. The farmer was told to disprove what had been reported to them, but if he failed to do so, he would be dealt with accordingly. He stood up and protested his innocence, but the witches still wanted proof before they would believe him. Scarcely able to speak, the poor man in desperation said, "May a round ring encompass me, and may grass never grow upon it any more, if I am not innocent of the crime laid to my charge." No one knows what became of the farmer after this incident, except he was released and able to tell his tale. Little else was known about the witches, except that they were of a cruel and vengeful disposition. This is borne out by the fact the farmer was not the only one to fall foul of them, and their curses. Around the same time, in a small cottage on the Sheerdale Ridge, there lived a man called Paddy McNichol. He was a small man who always wore a blue coat, plush waistcoat, and knee breeks, with a tam o' shanter hat with a red top. It was quietly believed that he had been in league with the Dollar witches. It was said McNichol wouldn't allow the Bible or any other religious book into his home, which was uncommon for the time, and this was viewed dimly by the local God-fearing folk. One day the local minister, Mr. Cupples, went to see him to show him the errors of his way, and managed to get him to accept the gift of a Bible that he'd taken with him. Every Sunday after this saw McNichol at the Dollar Kirk, and although he had to walk 3 miles to get there, he never missed a sermon, unless he was so ill it prevented him from doing so. The witches, unsurprisingly, weren't too happy about this turn of events. One day, while he was out for a walk, he unexpectedly felt a rush of wind and immediately felt himself being lifted from the ground and carried through the air at speed. The next morning he was found half dead and hungry on the top of Semab Hill, near Muckert. He was taken home, but never fully recovered from that night. His health deteriorated, and he died soon afterwards, but not before telling his story of being whisked away. The witches weren't quite finished yet, though. The minister who had brought the Bible to Patty was next in the firing line. Noises and loud screams were heard in the corner of his house, but when he went to investigate, he couldn't see anything. On another occasion, the relentless screaming forced the minister to leave his house in Middlebank with nothing but his sark on. He ran down to a small cottage called Willow Wands, chased by a black boar all the way down the road. The following Sunday, as he was walking to church, planks of wood rained down in front of him, but the minister withstood it all, and it was said he completely baffled the devil that day. Whatever happened to the Dollar Witches is unknown, as by this time the witch hunts had stopped. Perhaps the coven disbanded, or maybe the witches simply moved on. No one knows, and it remains a mystery to this day.